Welcome to Financial Reporting F7. One of the pillars of the ACCA qualification. You mustn't forget that the ACCA is an accounting qualification, so obviously any kind of financial accounting, financial reporting must be fundamental to the skills you need to call yourself an ACCA. Obviously you need to study law and tax and all these other subjects, also extremely important. But if you're talking about practical accounting, the ability to prepare what's known as an income statement and a balance sheet or statement of financial position is fundamental to you being seen as a qualified accountant. So it's a great privilege for me to welcome you to F7. It's reputed to have the biggest syllabus in the whole of the ACCA. I was at an examiners conference recently, and one of the speakers felt that F7 had the biggest syllabus in the whole of the ACCA, all levels, and yet it had, certainly at that time, one of the best pass rates. But I noticed that recently the pass rates have gone down slightly, and the reason is people are a little bit complacent about F7 because the pass rates often were, in the 50s, 52%, that kind of thing, at a time when many other papers were at a 30% level. Nowadays I notice our papers come down to the 30s and alongside many other papers. So I think people are taking it very casually because it seemed like an easy paper to pass. I think the examiners slightly upgraded it. So more about that in a few minutes. So take this paper very seriously. It's a great subject. I love it. I've been teaching it for many, many years. My name is Francis Braganza. My background in accounting, I did a degree in accounting, and then I did the Chartered Accountancy exams, ICAW, very similar to ACCA, but slightly different stream where the strengths were accounting and audit and things like that. Those were my strengths, and therefore I teach accounting, financial reporting, that kind of thing. So that's my background. I did a degree in accounting, then I did the ICAW or Chartered Accountancy exams. So I'm an FCA, fellow of the Chartered Accountancy Institute, and I've been teaching for many, 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 many years. I won't say how long, but I will say how many people have passed with me, and I'm always delighted to be able to say that with the new results coming out, something like 27,000 people have passed with me. A couple of years ago, that figure was had crossed 25, going on to 26. Now it's crossed 27. So it's very exciting to have that many people on their way to qualifying. Hopefully, most of them by now would have qualified, and send other students they know to us, etc. And that's a very fulfilling job. And the biggest thing of all is that if you have any queries at all, do send me an email. I'll see if I can remember my Braganza, Braganza, at lsbf.co.uk. That'll come directly to me. Or go through the college interactive email, and that'll also be passed on. But if you do this, if you send it directly to me, it'll come on to my computer at home or wherever I'm sat in front of a computer screen. I can answer your email immediately. The biggest thing of all is not to let it build up. And so when you come to the 8th session, you think you haven't learned anything so far, do ask queries as you go along. I'd be delighted to help. Because I want you to add to that 27,000, not for my sake, but for yours, just for the feeling of giving up your precious time. Listen to my videos. We'll have a few interactive sessions together, of course, when you can ask questions, and a virtual classroom type of atmosphere. And if you send me any emails in advance, then I can address those queries when I'm doing my interactive sessions with you. But enough about me. This course is for you, and you're most welcome. Thank you for choosing our college, and I hope my videos partly entertain you, but most importantly get you through comfortably and explain to you how financial reporting works. You have a marketable skill you can take out into the real world as well. So let's start with the syllabus. You will not believe how much we have to do in each study session, simply because the syllabus is so vast. As I say, reputed to be the biggest syllabus in the whole of the ACCA. And the reason why it's big, I suppose, is every time there's a new accounting standard, international standard, it just gets added and added and added on to the syllabus. Sometimes he'll say to you, the examiner will say to you, this new international standard that's been published, why was it? How does it improve on the old one? So you have to know a little bit about the old as well as the new. So those are quite searching questions. I noticed recently he's begun to upgrade the F7 paper, causing much more serious problems. But I'll tell you why in a few minutes when I show you a picture of the examiner and how he thinks, etc. First, let's look at the syllabus. Conceptual framework, regulatory framework. Conceptual, of course, is the various concepts like going concern, prudence, accruals, etc. that make up the conceptual framework of accounting, the rules. Regulatory, of course, more to do with Companies Acts and international standards, etc. Don't forget the International Accounting Standards, IASs, came to an end in about the year 2000. And then from 2000 onwards, those IASs, when they were issued, new ones were issued, they were called IFRSs, International Financial Reporting Standards. So, for example, when IFRS 3 was issued, it did a lot to shake up group accounting consolidations. And then recently, about 18 months ago, they issued a new IFRS 3. So we have an IFRS 3 revised. So what's an IFRS? International Financial Reporting Standard. So we had IASs up to 2000, and then you had IFRSs after 2000 till today, 10 years on. So be aware that quite a few IASs and IFRSs are examinable. In every student accountant magazine about April time, March-April time, or later in the year, around about September, October time, that sort of time, September, they'll give you the examinable documents, so don't forget. But I'll be aware of them anyway, so I'll be guiding you through any changes. A lot changed recently on consolidations, as I say, about 18 months ago. But since that time, fortunately, not much has changed. The only change has been the slightly higher level of examination that Steve Scott, the examiner, seems to be going for. Okay, regulatory framework, conceptual framework. The other thing, of course, is financial statements. That is to say, how do you prepare an income statement, balance sheet, a statement of financial position, a cash flow statement, that kind of thing. Also under that heading you have things like tax and depreciation and something called impairment, which is like extra depreciation. You have leasing. If you can't afford to buy an asset outright, you have to enter into a deal with someone called the lessor, who is the owner, where you temporarily rent the asset and eventually you buy it, sometimes called hire purchase. There are some legal differences between hire purchase and leasing, which I'll explain when I'm doing that lecture. But how do you deal with the interest, the capital, the installments, etc. that you pay on your way to eventually owning the asset? That's called leasing. Another fundamental topic within the 11 areas is the ability to do construction contracts. Let's say if you were putting up a big Olympic stadium somewhere, how much profit do you take at the end of the first year? If it takes 5 years to construct this thing, do you wait till the 5th year when you hand over the stadium to your client and take all the profit in that year, having made losses in years gone by because you had lots of expenses? That would not be true and fair, would it? So what you've got to do is to work out a system whereby every year you calculate your expenses compared to a proportion of the income and take some profit as you go along. That gives a more true and fair, more kind of a matching basis to your activities, matching your cost to your revenue. And how you carry out that process is, for example, enshrined in something called IAS 11, which is construction contracts. So I'll take you through that. It was a hot tip for December 2009, but there was hardly anything in there. In fact, it was, apart from some mistakes students made by accidentally bringing it in, it wasn't actually examined. So I'm wondering whether, therefore, this time, if you're doing June 2010, it has a very good chance. Certainly, if it doesn't come up in June 2010, it'll certainly come up in December 2010, because even though everyone was expecting it in December 2009, it didn't come up. So this is construction contracts. What else do we have? Leasing, tax, etc., contracts, lots and lots, 11 items altogether. Business combinations, that's where you have something called a parent company who has more than half the voting shares or more than half the directors of someone called its subsidiary. And then sometimes what happens is the parent company has shares in someone called an associate, which is where the parent might have between 20 and 50% of the shares. So if you have more than 50%, I become what's known as your subsidiary, if you're the parent. Subsidiary, you're the parent. And if the parent has between 20 and 50%, not 51, 50% of this other company called an associate, group accounts or business combinations is a skill whereby you add these three companies together. Obviously, there are things like the group being seen as a single economic unit, and any transactions within the group are cancelled, and transactions with the outside world are recognized, because no one can make a profit by trading with himself. That kind of thing. It's a wonderful topic. As a student, I felt it was my best topic. As a lecturer, I'd feel no different. And it seems like a good thing as well, because students, the average student, finds group accounts quite difficult. I don't think it's difficult at all. I'm going to make it my first topic and give you some time to assimilate the whole idea and get back to me, ask any queries through email, etc. So that's business combinations. The other great topic, of course, is analyzing and interpreting financial statements. That is to say, where you have what's known as ratio analysis. For example, you may or may not have heard of this, but if you've got a business that makes a profit, you call that a return. If that profit has been achieved by using capital, employing capital in the business, assets and liabilities invested, that's called capital employed. And so the famous ratio, return on capital employed, I'll show you how the formula works. We'll then look at some examples during the videos. And what will happen in the exam is he'll give you a challenge and you work out some of these ratios and make some comments. Now, what disappointed the examiner in December last year, and he mentioned this at a meeting recently, he gives you a return on capital employed formula in the question. He also gives you the information you need, the income statement and the balance sheet or statement of financial position for 2 years for the same company. So I'll say that again. He's given you the formula of how to work out return on capital employed. Return on top, capital employed underneath, a fraction multiplied by 100, 30%, 40% or whatever. Return on top, profit divided by capital employed, which is the assets employed in the business. So it gives you the formula in the question. It gives you this year and last year's income statement with the profit in it, obviously. And it gives you the balance sheet or statement of financial position, assets and liabilities, from which you work out the net assets or capital employed. So he gives you all this, and then he says to you, can you please work out the return on capital employed percentage for this year and last year? You know that 90% of the candidates, according to the examiner, could not even work out the ratios. People are doing F7 being under-prepared, sadly. You consider it, even as an objective outsider, though of course you're coming in to do F7 with me, if a person with just basic intelligence was given a formula, very kindly, very generously by the examiner, and then is given this information and you have a calculator, all you have to do is to put that information into this formula and work out whether this year is better than last year. And people, 90% of the candidates couldn't even do that. Need I say, the second part of the question was making comments about why you think this year was not as good as last year, whichever way around it went. And that, of course, was done even worse because people don't like writing about accounting. So make sure you do the homework, ask me any queries. If you can build up a bank of knowledge with some good skills, you'll shine out from the crowd, because the standard of students' performance, whether it's exam nerves or not, I don't know, but generally done extremely badly, this paper, which is why the pass rate is quite low, sadly. So don't fall into the wrong part of the pass rate, of course. It's easy to pass if you just develop some basic skills. So what else is there in the syllabus? I think we've said enough there. You can have a look. All these are in my notes, which I've written myself. Format of the exam, of course, comes from the examiner. It's all compulsory, so that's bad news. Consolidations, including a small discussion element for about 5 marks. Why do you do consolidation? Why do you cancel intercompany transactions? You'll have to say, well, no person can make a profit by trading with himself, so you're only dealing with the outside world, that kind of thing. So for 5 marks, they'll ask you to discuss things. I noticed recently for the last 2-3 exams, the 20 marks numerical side of question 1 has been so demanding that he hasn't had time, the student hasn't had time within 45 minutes, since the examiner hasn't allocated any marks to discussion. That worries me a little bit for this time, of course, because he has to set some discussion from time to time, so it could well be this time. So as you are reading my notes, do spend some extra time trying to understand why we do certain things, because if you understand the reason why things are done, the execution of the numbers, the doing of the numbers becomes a bit more convincing for the marker, and you can do it with more certainty. And of course, if the examiner asks you to write about these issues, if you spend time thinking about the concepts and the reason why we do things, you'll score those 5 marks. Okay, so that's question 1. Basically consolidations, the first topic in my syllabus, in my videos. The second topic, of course, preparing, restating financial statements. What that is basically is you get a trial balance. Now, as you should know from F3, by the way, if you've got exempted from F3 excuse me, do consider getting hold of the F3 videos, either at your firm or whatever, if they've bought it off the college, or enroll on your own. I've done the F3 videos, takes you through the basics. If you've got exempted from F3, do consider watching the videos, because some of it will help you at F7 as well. So preparing and restating financial statements, published accounts. What that means is you have, from F3 knowledge, little transactions. You buy and sell things, you put money into the bank, etc. These transactions are recorded in what's known as a journal, or almost like a little diary. These journal entries are grouped together in little things called accounts, stories about things. So if you have a bank account, you have a story within the business of all the transactions with the bank. So it goes into what's known as a bank account or a cash book. That is added up periodically from time to time, say once a year at least. And that's extra. The balances are taken out and put on another piece of paper with the headings, with either debit balances or credit balances. This is called the trial balance. You try to make it balance. Beyond that, where our paper comes in F7, is where the examiner gives you certain adjustments, closing stock, inventory, depreciation, maybe some provisions, a bit of tax, and so on. And you put these transactions through, and so those original trial balance figures are slightly amended, and then about half of them go to the income statement, the other half goes to the balance sheet, the SFB. statement of financial position. That's a very fundamental skill. That's question 2. Sometimes I might give you a set of accounts with mistakes in it which you might have to correct. So I explain this in more detail in my video. Do please have a look. Question 3 is performance appraisal, interpretation and or cash flows. Now you mustn't restrict your preparation. What's been happening recently is because you can either get interpretation or cash flows, students have been guessing. So if cash flows came up in one sitting, they say it can't come up in the next, only ratios can. And sometimes they can get away with it. So if you have cash flow, then you have ratio, then you have cash flow, then you have ratios. A time will come when the examiner will have half cash flows, half ratios, like indeed happened in December 2009, following a similar sort of thing in June 2009. So recently he's begun to catch out students who are cutting down question 3 from 2 topics to 1 topic. Because in real life, you need to be able to do interpretation. You need to be able to do cash flows. So both of those are extremely important, not just to pass this exam, but on a practical level. Indeed, a higher ideal is to learn about accounting, quite apart from just passing. Though to pass, you need to know both, because he sometimes gives you half and half in the same exam. Do be careful. I believe in June 2009, 15 marks were on cash flows and 10 on interpretation. In December 2009, 18 marks was on cash flows and 7 was on that return on capital employed I told you about, the interpretation. So do be careful. What shocked many people with question 3 in December 2009, the most recent exam, is where the examiner says, even though the cash flow was for 18 marks, please work out a figure for the purchase of non-current assets. Do anything you like, but give me a figure. That was a huge chunk of marks. He then says to you, also, can you do the figures that would have appeared in a cash flow statement for investing activities? And then separately he says, can you do the same sort of thing for financing activities? So notice the clever way in which he's examining nowadays. He doesn't say prepare a cash flow statement. That's the old style of exam. What's happening nowadays, he'll pick out little bits of a big cash flow statement, assuming you know how to do a big cash flow statement, and specifically asking you to do certain calculations. And many students get a bit shaken up by that because they like to be organized and ordered. Give me a piece of paper, I'd like to head it up, cash flow statement for the year ended, I'll do my operating activities, a little bit lower down I do my investing activities, and then I'll do my financing activities maybe on the next page. So I'll do my operating, investing, financing, those 3 categories, and the whole thing balances beautiful. The examiner says, no. That's the old style of exam. What I'm going to ask you is, you do these specific calculations. Just tell me about investing. What goes in there? Do your workings and give me figures. Then tell me about your financing, shares being issued, etc., loans being repaid. But you can imagine what I'm going to say. Weaker students prepare the normal cash flow anyway, and for the operating they got 0 because it wasn't asked for. So you've got to be imaginative with this examiner. So do be careful. So So, interpretation and or cash flow, a mixture is quite common. And then you have conceptual regulatory framework, accounting standards. 2 questions, in fact. How are standards set? That kind of thing. Now, what's quite interesting, I think, is to see the split of marks between the various questions. Indeed, if I were to say to you to write down here with me, please, standards marks. I explain this in more detail in the first video, but can I just say a few words here? I notice the consolidations, of course, nothing specifically about the standards. So, of course, 3 or 4 standards make up consolidations. But more specifically, something like 15 marks is on standards in question 2. Question 3 is 5 marks Question 4 and 5, as you can see, the whole lot is on standards. Now, if you add that up, it's quite a shocking statistic, really. Something like 45 marks is on standards. Not just writing, but numbers as well. He might say to you, if you are a seller of some electrical goods and you feel that you have to give a guarantee to make the goods attractive to the public, at the year end, if you are aware that 5% of the goods come back because they're defective and you have to pay for the repairs, at the year end you can't take all the sales in. You've got to make a provision for this future expenditure on repairs. Now that is governed by something called International Standard IS 37, provisions and contingencies, that kind of thing. So these are topics that I need to do before you can face something like question 2. Indeed, that could come up in questions 4 and 5. So the amazing statistic is that 45%, 40 to 45, recently it's gone up to 45%, percent of our papers on standards. So I'm going to spend about half my time, half the videos, doing standards, just under. And I'd like you to back it up by reading all these notes, etc. Quite apart from the from the notes, there is this superb textbook written by one of the examiner's own markers to write it for us, if I could say that to you in confidence, privately. Extremely useful to read what a marker for the examiner thinks about the exam. Where she is particularly good, this lady author, is the written bits on standards. I find it's really interesting. Even I learn something as I read it. Beautifully written. So we commissioned her to spend time. She gave us a lot of her time very kindly. And so she writes extremely well. I think for technical matters, techniques, please use my methods, because that's what the videos are linked to. But you'll find that her methods are very, 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 very similar. But the main area where you'll benefit from reading this textbook, apart from my own class notes, of course, and videos, is the standards areas. Okay, so please make a mental note of that. What else can I say? With regard to Paper 7, it is ACCA's second level accounting, financial accounting. Very different to Paper F3, which is the paper I also teach, and 1.1, as it used to be called, or CAT, or AAT, and that kind of thing you might have done, and be examined in greater depth. Don't assume. One of the sad things I find, especially evening students, they'll come to me and say, I've done my AAT, or I've done my CAT, and so what's this ACCA stuff, paper F7? I know all this. And so a little bit of an arrogance creeps in because they've passed AAT. Don't forget, this is not AAT. There's several steps higher than that. So even though the topics might seem familiar, the way it's examined, the depth of the questions is a completely different league to anything you might have done in AAT or CAT. So do be careful of that. Indeed, it might be at a different level to what you've done as a degree. Otherwise, ACCA would have given you exemption had they felt your degree was good enough for F7 to exempt you. So do be careful. As I say, if you've been exempted from F3, do pick up the video if you can. Either register and listen to them, or if you have access to the notes or whatever from friends, do have a look, because I'm assuming F3 knowledge when I do my F7. But don't worry, I realize that lots of people have been exempted and they don't have the time or the money or the facility to access the F3 video. So I try to explain F7 on its own, but it's just the terminology and the layout and so on. It's a good thing to be familiar with the basic level before you come to F7. Certainly the examiner expects that. Okay, so it's a huge syllabus with one of the best pass rates in the ACCA, except recently when the pass rate has begun to fall, because people have not been taking the paper as seriously as they should have. Don't fall into that category, may I say. So as I say there, December 2009 was quite challenging, requiring you to often think about the point of the question and then critically appraise information given. Now, there was a question about assets. Now, recently the international body has said that human assets, an employee works, let's say I work for you, you're my employer, you send me on a course, staff training course, and I build up skills, and I come back and work for you. A week ago, I didn't have those skills. A week later, having been on a course for a week, learning how to use computers or whatever, I come back to you, maybe some management skills I've developed during that week. I come back to you with all this knowledge, and I'm a much more valuable asset to you. So the examiner says this staff training course, the cost of it, since it increases the value of the employee, should that be on the balance sheet? Should that be recognized as an asset in the statement of financial position or not? Very interesting question. And the answer is no. The reason is, of course, even though you might train me up, I could walk away, go out through the front door and take my skills to another company because I'm not tied to you forever. Of course, I've got to give you 6 months' notice or whatever it might be, a few months' notice before I leave. But I could take with me, transport with me the skills that you've paid for me to develop, and I could take them and work for a rival company. Not that I'm going to, of course not, but I tend to be a very loyal type of person to work for the same company for years and years and years. I feel a bit more settled. That's just my view. It's not everyone's view. But some people do like moving around to get the best deal and that kind of thing and improve their skills. So that's great. But if you spend money training me up and I leave and take my skills with me, what do? Because you don't own the asset, you don't own me, that should not come onto the balance sheet. Now that required a bit of thinking, didn't it? And so lots of people found that a hard question, because many people said, oh yes, the asset has been trained up and is more valuable, therefore the asset goes up in value, it should be treated as a non-current asset. But the answer is actually, no, that's wrong. So something small like that, which I explain under intangible assets in my notes, might turn up in the exam when you're least expecting it. So that's quite a hard point, really. And there were other issues, of course, within that question. Another interesting one was when there's something called earnings per share, which I'll explain in due course. You take the profit and you divide it by the number of shares in a company, and if you have a higher earnings per share this year compared to last year, this year has done better than last year. You see, performance is better this year. Now, the examiner said to you, if you're talking about earnings per share as a measure of performance, or profit as a measure of performance, and this kind of thing, different measures, why would 1 year be better than another year? Now, that required incredibly deep thinking to even approach that question. And the examiner says to us at a meeting that the most common answer was earnings per share is defined as follows. Here's the formula, and that's what I've learned by heart, and that's it. But the examiner is not asking that. He's saying if earnings per share changes between 2 years, what might the reason behind it be? So notice it's a different level of question to just churning out a definition. So many students who are underprepared, especially part-time students who don't put in don't have time to do. I was a part-time student myself, so I sympathize with the family and all that. Very hard to study, but I did, and I passed comfortably. So it is possible. Part-time students particularly are vulnerable, I think, because they don't put in the time. So if you've done some sort of quick little studies hoping that you'll pass, all you can remember is, well, earnings per share is defined as follows. That gets you no marks. You might get half a mark for it. But the bulk of the marks, I can't remember if it's 5 or 6 marks, something like that, is for explaining reasons why the earnings per share might be different between 1 year and another. You might have issued more shares, perhaps. And so when you divide the profit by the number of shares this year, i.e. by more shares, obviously the earnings per share could fall. That kind of thing, you see, rather than just the definition of earnings per share. So I noticed recently the examiner's got a bit carried away with the detail, and he's setting much more searching questions, so that worries me a little bit. Critically appraise, quite a strong word. So 45% of the paper is on standards and concepts, about a third of it is written. Now here's another huge statistic. Sadly, according to the examiner at this international conference I attended in February 2009, ACCA have these conferences once every couple of years or so, and I always go to that. My bosses always give me time off, which is very kind of them. But I do attend and I listen to the examiner, trying to learn how he examines and get into the mind of the examiner and help to predict future questions, you see. So I put in the time for all that, and I'll share all of that in the videos, of course. A third of the paper is written. So what he says is the most common reason for failure is students see 67% of the paper numbers, numerical, computational. 33% writing with words. Many people come into accountancy saying, look, I do numbers. I'm a numbers person. So they literally put a line through 33% of the paper. And so they try to get their 50, which is the pass mark, out of 67. Now you can tell that must be up in the late 70s, that kind of percentage, 75 and beyond. So it's very hard to do that in the exam with all the pressures you have of this huge syllabus. So can I suggest, don't switch off from the written bits, take them seriously. I'm sure I'll stress that in the videos when you see them. So the biggest reason for failure, apart from timekeeping, of course, that's another big issue, you've got to be very strict with your time. The biggest reason for failure is reluctance, unwillingness to attempt the written parts of this paper. To be honest, the written parts are marked more leniently. I have friends who are markers for the examiner. Someone I know quite well is one of the chief markers, supervising markers, and he says that people are reluctant to write. They do the numbers, they leave out all the written stuff, and so they get 46% rather than 50%, which is a pretty good performance if you get 46 out of 67. It's a very good performance, but it's not quite good enough. So he has given me to understand that when they mark the numerical side, they mark to a certain perfect answer which the examiner gives them. But when it comes to written material, the examiner says, accept any reasonable point. So what that means, of course, is if you're not sure, you can have a guess at what the answer might be. And as long as it's roughly in the same area as the answer guide, you get your marks. So it's actually harder to satisfy the numerical requirements because there is a perfect answer. With the written parts of the questions, as long as you have a go at it, it doesn't have to be perfect. You'll still get enough to pass because there is no perfect answer most of the time. So it's actually easier to pass the written bits than the numerical bits because the marking is much more lenient. So don't reject the written bits of the paper, take them seriously. Lots of that is covered in the standards. You notice recently in June and December the written parts of the paper have fallen slightly. That does worry me about the next exam, June 2010, where the written bit might go up. Many successful candidates say to me that for every hour they spend listening to F7 lectures, either through video and class with me, they spend at least 4 more hours of additional study, including pre-exam revision. Now, that sounds very harsh. As I say, I was a part-time student myself, and with a small baby towards the end, who's now all grown up, which is great. And I found it very hard to be torn between. My time seemed to be like that little cartoon there. My wife drawing me one way, baby drawing me another way, work drawing me another way, family and financial worries and all that kind of thing as a student. Very hard. How do I use my time? Do I do a little bit of overtime at work? I used to be a trainee accountant in a medium-sized firm to earn a few more pounds for my family. Or do I give up my late-night work if I can? Sometimes it's compulsory, of course, so that I can use that time to study. It's a big tearing of your time. That's what it feels like. So that's a good picture there, if I may say so. Most of us feel like that. Now, don't be alarmed by the 4 more hours. What I mean is, apart from listening to the video and spending a bit of time doing homework, etc., at times you'll have to do lots of hours. Sometimes you do very little hours, just listen to the video. And of course, when you're doing revision right at the end, you'll spend many hours on your own running through lots of these revision kit, exam kit questions. So, questions and answers we supplied. Looks a bit like this, a thinner version of this, written by the same lady, as I say, with very, very good written answers. So that's the kind of thing you get, similar colour scheme. But that's the exam questions and answers. So I'll have quite a few of these live sessions with you. I think there are 4 more apart from today. And if you send me your email queries, I can address them when I do the videos. I can adapt my material, what I'm going to be covering, based on what you want. I'm here for you only. I could easily do a proper job, so to speak, outside as a training manager, whatever, or indeed a technical manager in one of these big accountancy firms and do very well. But I like teaching and I love to get people through. So don't hesitate to send me emails and things. It's wonderful. I just came across the ACCA results. As you know, have just come out, a chap there. I tell you what he was like. We used to have these big classes. He would just sit there and would just look at me. And I'm doing a huge published accounts exercise or a big group accounts exercise. He wouldn't write anything down. He would just stare at me, and I thought, oh my goodness, what's happened? Is it my hair or what is it? But he would just look at me and he would just try to understand what I was saying and occasionally make a little note. But most of the time he didn't write very much. So I took him aside one day and said, excuse me, aren't you supposed to be writing something with me? I'm doing these huge questions. He said, oh yeah, yes. It's being recorded, so I'll go back and listen to the videos. I'll listen to the recordings. But the main thing I want to do is to understand what you're saying, the logic, the meaning. Do you know, just now he said to me he got 67. And I have to say, December 2009 was quite a hard exam. I haven't seen the official pass rate yet, but this fellow got 67%. Absolutely true. A matter of an hour and a half ago, he was shaking my hand, vigorously thanking me. And I said to him, yes, I remember you because you used to stare at the screen and try your best to understand the logic. He said, oh yes, all I want to do is understand why you were doing it, the how I would do at home. Now that's an unusual student. I think it's a good thing to work with me when I'm doing my videos and copying it off the screen, etc., replaying it, when you're listening to the videos, and looking at my notes, etc. And I've done lots and lots of additional answers. So do make sure you've got the latest version of my notes. So quite apart from this introduction, I've got 4 more, I believe, maybe 5 interactive sessions with you, including some revision at the end. At least 4. If they give me 5, I'll do 5, no problem. And but in between, do feel I'm in touch with you, any queries whatsoever. But that's where the 4 hours comes from, not necessarily as we go along every session, but including revision right at the end. Now, beyond that, I have the examiner's approach to paper F7. Just to show you what the examiner thinks. When preparing for the exam, it is vital that you have a good understanding of what the examiner is looking for, of course. In this extract from the student accountant, when the new syllabus was published, Steve Scott, the examiner, writes about how to pass, etc. Don't forget that this is obviously an accounting qualification, and so something like financial reporting is fundamental to your skills as an ACCA. So don't ever forget that this is not a law qualification, nor indeed is it a tax qualification. There are solicitors and barristers and all that kind of thing around those qualifications. There's also tax exams, proper accounting, pure tax exams, where you become an associate of the Tax Institute, etc. But this is an accounting exam, so you expect financial accounting to be a very important part of this. We call it financial reporting, of course. How to pass. So what I'd like you to do at home is to read through this bit of the handout that I've given you. With Steve Scott, the examiner's permission, I've reproduced his words when he first took on this new syllabus. He's been the examiner for something like 26 exams, I believe, so about 13 years now. So this is only about 4 or 5 sittings ago when he first, when he picked up this new syllabus for the first time. So very useful to read that. So lots and lots of information there. The paper also forms the basis of the assumed knowledge required for the next level, known as P2, corporate reporting. So, especially things like consolidations. On successful completion of our paper, candidates should be able to discuss and apply a conceptual framework, a regulatory framework. One speaks about concepts, the other talks about standard setting. All covered in my notes and in the textbook. Prepare and present financial statements that conform with the international financial reporting standards and, of course, IAS's, International Accounting Standards, also in the syllabus, some of them, like construction contracts, IAS 11, doesn't have an IFRS number because it was issued before the year 2000. As you know, in the year 2000, the IAS has stopped and the IFRS has began. Accounting for business combinations, that is to say consolidations, and then analyze and interpret financial statements. Don't forget cash flows also as part of that coverage. F7, the examiner says, builds on knowledge acquired in F3. That is why I say make sure you get hold of the F3 videos, either enrolling for it. I don't think it costs that much. The interactive college tends to sell it quite cheap, so that's great. It helps you, if you need to have a look at it, to get your F7 well organized. I don't insist that you must. All I'm saying is it's a useful option. If you can listen to some of those topics, it might give you, especially things like limited company accounts and why we do accounts, trial balance and correction of errors and little topics like that. It also helps you with P2, corporate reporting, and I understand also with P3, business analysis, which has lots of ratios and earnings per share and all that kind of thing. And of course F8, which is very close to F7, which is where you audit something the directors have done, and the directors might have gone against the principles in some accounting standard, which is what I will teach you, an IFRS. So that's why F7 and F8 go together quite nicely. Knowledge in F7 will help you in F8 for sure. What else can I say? If I move on a little bit more through this introduction, I've shown you the syllabus, the exam paper. Now I'm showing you what the examiner is like. You need to understand and apply accounting standards. At least 45% of the paper is on standards. 45 marks out of 100. That's quite a high percentage. So put a lot of time into the standards. Almost half your studying time should be spent on standards. Even though it's interesting to do group accounts and all that kind of thing, cash flows, do spend time reading the standards in the textbook or in my notes. Student accountant, nowadays only available online, I'm afraid, to cut down on costs, I imagine. But do read it. Occasionally I write the odd article. I've been a bit busy recently. I've written for them something like 25, 30 times over the years. So do have a look. There are some super articles in there. One written by Steve Scott in August 2008, where he explains group accounts. Okay, so I'll just say e.g. August 2008, written by Examiner on how you do the new group accounts, how you cope with the new accounting standard on group accounts. So all that is in my lectures anyway. Modern accounting standards can be very detailed and complex, and it would be inappropriate to expect candidates at this level to have a complete knowledge of the such standards. Last week, in fact, a student said to me, a lady said, shall I buy the standards themselves, the international accounting standards, and shall I study them? I said, you can if you wish, but it's 2,500 pages long, and it might put you off. I've read them to the extent that I need to teach them, and I've summarized them in my notes. And obviously, if you know what's in my notes, that's more than enough to pass easily. If you want to back it up, do please read our textbook, but don't bother with the international standards themselves. Of course, if you want to practice in accountancy as a practicing accountant, giving advice to clients in years to come, obviously, for that reason, it may be good to buy the standards themselves, but not necessarily for F7. It might just confuse you, because there's lots in there we don't need. foreign currency pensions, all that kind of thing is outside our syllabus. Even things like financial instruments are examined quite superficially for us. But if you read the standard, it might confuse you. Too much knowledge is also a dangerous thing. So just my notes plus the textbook should be more than enough. Okay, so plenty there for you to read and understand. The theoretical and conceptual issues, as I say there, I mentioned most of these things in passing. A little later, the concept of business combinations. Consolidation questions towards the end of the paragraph will be limited to a parent company and one subsidiary. As I was saying earlier, as I started this introduction, you have a parent, a subsidiary where you have more than half the shares. This company has more than half the shares of this company. And alternatively, this company could have between 20 and 50% of this company called an associate. So how do you add a subsidiary, an associate to a subsidiary to a parent? Certain techniques, certain things to avoid. That is a fascinating first topic. It is in many ways the hardest point in the syllabus, the hardest topic in the syllabus. I do it first to give you time to come back to me and ask questions. And it's also the first thing you see in the exam, so that's why I do it first. So I hope you enjoy my techniques. I've built them up over, as I say, a quarter of a century. And I'm still refining them, but I hope what I have in the videos is crystal clear and will get you a comfortable mark. Like my student friend a couple of hours ago, he's 67, and he was absolutely delighted with it because he didn't think he'd done that well. But I said to him, if you know the basics, you don't have to shine in the exam, you don't have to be perfect, as long as you can show that you're really solid and you know some techniques and you understand the standards, you'll appear to be much better than the average candidate. So I hope that happens to you as well. What else do we have? A little later on, I want you to read those various bits. The next page, format and structure of the exam, I think I've said enough to you about that. Questions go on. And then as you come to page 13, you see what the examiner looks like, Steve Scott himself. PQ magazine, another really good magazine called PQ Accountant. Just www.PQ Accountant. Just enroll. You can register online. It's a free magazine. And in that, Steve Scott himself will write certain things, give certain tips. It's a very good magazine. It's simpler to read than Student Accountant. And you are entitled to it free of charge. So the editor there, very sympathetic to students and often takes up the cause of students if the questions are too long or the invigilator makes an unacceptable noise in the exam or the exam hall isn't quite right. Students write into this gentleman, Graham Hambley, and he writes a little article or something and gets at the ACCA to improve it. So he's a big champion for us students and lecturers. So PQ Accountant, another very good magazine. Do register online. But this is Steve Scott, who writes in all these magazines. In my opinion, a brilliant examiner. It's just my personal opinion. Firm but fair. Very understanding of pressures. You see, students are under very generous marker. I've heard him discussing with the lecturers how they mark. And if you're in the 48, 49 region, they remark it, trying to find a couple of extra marks. This is what gives me the impression that he's very generous. Produces wonderful discussion answer questions. So use the techniques I use for the numbers, because I think my techniques are more step by step by step. But if you're looking at Steve Scott's model answers on the internet, etc., on the ACCA website, his written answers are absolutely first class, absolutely brilliant. I think it's probably, dare I say it, better the written questions than the numerical questions. Being such a clever person, he can probably do the numbers very, very fast, but you and I need to do them with steps. So use my steps, but use his words for the answers. Though, of course, my words are not too bad, I'm sure. Very friendly and approachable gentleman. Only negative, now I had to put this in recently, It may not be on the videos. I just added this in recently, which is why I like these live sessions. I can bring in the latest stuff. Some little feeling I had talking to him recently and talking to one of his chief markers, etc. The only negative and big challenge for us, he's been the examiner for so many years. I was saying something like 13 years. And you can imagine if you were the examiner and you've set these 26 exams and every question one is on consolidation, a time will come when you say, wonder if I can make this a little bit more interesting for myself, never mind for students. So what's been happening is he's begun to do slightly cleverer things, and students who aren't aware of that, haven't been preparing adequately, are falling short of the standard he has set. Now, I'll just give you an example. I was chatting to a few students a couple of hours ago. There is something called financial instruments, okay, in our syllabus, examined only superficially. But let's say you have a 5-year term. You start with something on the first day of the year, and by the end of the year you show something in your balance sheet, your SFP. And that closing position becomes the opening position in the new year, and so that carries on to the end of the second year. The end of the second year becomes the start of the third year, and you do this little table of figures. Now, until recently, what he used to do, he would say something like in a published or group's question, on the first day of this financial year, the financial instrument started. And so by the end of the year, you've just got 1 year to worry about. What I noticed in the last couple of exams, especially this June and December last year, is he asks you for the end of the second year, not the first year. So he'll say something like, this happened 2 years ago, and it's been going on for 2 years. What will the figure be in the balance sheet and the SFP at the end of the second year? What goes to the income statement in the second year? So if you're a bit closed about dates and a bit careless, you might just do it for the first year, which is failure, of course. You've got to read the dates to make sure it comes into the second year. So where you have things that go on for many years, he's asking for the second and third year and so on, whereas until recently he used to only ask for the first year, information about the first year. So that's something that I noticed since he's been the examiner for so long, he's begun to get into all these areas. So do take the paper very seriously, study as hard as you can, ask me any queries whatsoever. It'll be a delight to get an email from you saying you got 67 or 75 or whatever. It's such a wonderful thing. Recently one of my students got 91, and a fabulous mark if you think about it. So hopefully that'll be you. If you have any problems, do ask us. But the biggest thing about this paper is be consistent in your study. Don't leave everything till the end. Don't try to do 3 videos in one day. It'll just be too much to digest. Be systematic. Any queries, do shout at our admin folk. They're extremely helpful. And if there's anything technical about the accounting, then speak to me directly. Send me an email directly. Just check with them my exact email address. I think what I put on the screen is correct. But I'll be delighted to help. And see you again soon on the interactive 4 or 5 more sessions I have, which will be advertised in advance. Quite often they're on Mondays, I think the odd Wednesday as well, but it is as per advertised. But thank you very much indeed and for enrolling with us. And I hope I make sense in all the videos. And I've put a lot of myself into my notes and feelings, passion, cartoons, humor, but most importantly, there is a good solid technique on each of the topics. Okay? So all the very best, and I hope you sail through this exam. Thank you so much for listening.